Good morning. Hello.
Hi, Christian. Hello. Good to see you.
It's good to see you as well. And everyone, welcome to Guardians of M365 Governance, episode 5. Lots going on.
It's incredible, yeah.
So for folks that are new to the show, very quickly, this Techie Guru series is a monthly webcast focused on the rapidly evolving and expanding Microsoft 365 governance story. Our goal is to share insights, best practices, and the latest information about new governance features and capabilities within Microsoft 365. So Ragnar, welcome and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, I'm Ragnar Heil, currently outdoors. Hopefully the connection... Oh my God. So hopefully the connection is going to be stable because I'm tethering with my phone. I'm here at a very large national festival where I have some services to do.
Are you following the Grateful Dead or what? You're that kind of...
No, it's from our in Germany. We have got 16 different states, and now the national party of our state is in my home city. So I'm here the whole week celebrating, but also being part of events. So actively enjoying and consuming, but also helping and supporting it. So it's a very intensive week here.
Excellent. Well, and for those that don't know me, Christian Buckley, 12-time Microsoft MVP and Microsoft Regional Director. And I am, so like with Ragnar, we're both, part of the content team at Techie Gurus. I also have my consulting company, Collab Talk. And we are both very much in most of our careers, the last, for me, it's been 20 plus years, really focused on governance and things around the governance space. So this live stream, of course, is dedicated to everything governance within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So if you do have questions, if you have comments or thoughts throughout, please comment on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're watching. We'll be able to pull these in, and we're using StreamYard here. And we'd love to, we can even add guests in if we want, like our guest today.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. And by the way, if you would like to see more guests in the next weeks or month and years, please also drop us in the comments who should be on stage talking with us here every single month. We would love to hear your favorite recommendations, who we should invite. Or maybe we are going to invite you. So please let us know, because everything what we produce here is produced for you.
That's right. Well, and for this 5th episode, Ragnar and I welcome fellow M365 MVP Joy Apple. So adding Joy to the stage. Hey, Joy.
Hello.
Hello, Joy. Awesome to see you.
It's great
to see you too.
So, Joy, why don't you introduce yourself?
I would love to. Hello, everyone. My name is Joy Apple. I've been in the Microsoft space for about 16 years now. I'm with Orchestry Software. I'm their Director of Customer and Partner Success. 3, I think, time MVP award winner, which is still kind of surreal. But like Christian and Ragnar, I've spent, even though I didn't know it in the early days, I've spent most of my career championing governance, because it's really the cornerstone of successful technology implementation and adoption, even though the word itself kind of has a bad.
Well, it comes and goes around that. But, you made a great point. It'd be interesting to talk to people about like their origin story with things. Like so I look at myself as being like an early adopter, because in the mid to late 90s, I actually was chartered with it. Worked for the phone company, Pacific Bell, if anybody remembers them. It was actually chartered with creating a governance body for the organization, our customers, and I managed those for years. And so that was, IT governance and a services team inside a very large company. But I started becoming accustomed to, IT governance, corporate governance, IT governance, and then specifically governance within the applications that I owned and the systems that I helped run.
Yeah, and I worked at Microsoft Consulting Services, and then I was recommending governance solution for SharePoint 2007. I think that was my start. And then I was also part of this evaluation, which tool should customers go to. There were names on the market which don't exist at the moment anymore, like Metalogics. The AvePoint, Orchestry came later to the game. So I'm also here in the space since 2007.
Yeah. 07 was the first iteration of SharePoint I touched. I inherited a farm. I inherited a farm that had been built according to the org chart. I think we all know how that story ends. First farm I ever built from scratch was a 2010. And even then, I wasn't hearing the term governance a lot. But, when we look back, it's things like making sure our information architecture is not built according to the org chart. It's making sure we're following processes and procedures, that we're helping the end users, the business users, understand how to do things correctly so it's successful, not just because we have rules, but there's a purpose behind them. And so, 16 years later, it's like I talk about it all the time because that's what makes things work well.
Wait, this morning I was watching a brand new YouTube video published by Microsoft, and it was about SharePoint Advanced Governance, and then Microsoft employees share the best practices, and they were like, find out who's the content owner, clean up content, find the life cycle to clean up content. So for me, it sounds like nothing has really changed over the last 15, 20 years. What is your personal opinion? What is new now when you listen to your customers and your partners? Are there some new recommendations, or is it the same kind of recommendations we can reuse and utilize what we've already published 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Well, that very similar, like I think with both of you too, it's like my first customer deployment, like out in the field, was it's funny, I always say that I was working for a very large client in 2004, 2005, and they insisted on the SharePoint thing. I tried to talk them out of it. We tried to do a SharePoint server. So if you remember SharePoint server back in 2004 to 2006, it did not work well. But that was my first, like, I tried to convince them not to do SharePoint. They're like, no, we insist. We want this. And I kind of caught the bug, and a year later was working at Microsoft. And my first time presenting at an internal, used to be called Ready internally. I think it's been renamed at Microsoft. But the first topic that I presented on was around governance. And then specifically, we were talking about backup, archiving, business continuity, and information architecture. So, that goes back. That first presentation was in 2006. But again, I had been talking about, information architecture, and we talked a lot about search. And the problem was, even in the late 90s, was people say, content is going in, but we're not finding it. How do we get better at finding our content? And that was part of that discussion. It was it was a full-time job managing those systems.
And that's the way you find content, is you have to make sure you make it findable. And that's a conversation I've not consulted officially in about a year and a half now, since I'm at a product company. But, you still have those conversations with customers and clients just in passing. Because, if you're a consultant or a problem solver at heart, you never get over that. Even at home, I have to warn my husband. I was like, if we have this conversation, I will be solutioning. Do you want a solution, or are we just talking? But you have to make it findable when you put it in. And that conversation never gets obsolete, because as humans, I think we love to nest content down in those structures instead of flattening it out.
I love the difference you made here.
It's help us to find.
Searching versus finding. Those are two distinctive experiences. You want to have an experience to search, of how I can request, whether it's natural language, if I've got refiners, kind of the structure of that. But then there's the findable side. Like, you could have a wonderful search experience and never find what you need.
Yes.
I think of it as two distinct motions.
Oh, totally. And part of it is still, and I find it very interesting as a culture inside of our organizations, is probably most of us in this world that work on a computer have some sort of computer technology that we're on when we're not working, right? And we go to Google, we go to Bing, we go to Ask Jeeves, we go to DuckDuckGo, and we search for things in our personal lives all the time. But there's been a little bit of a disconnect. I think that gap's getting smaller, but there's been a disconnect about searching for content at work. People would rather look for things, go down those familiar click paths, than search for it because they're not confident they'll find it.
Right. Well, that's why I think in the broader sense that, looking at like intranet design, if that's what we're talking about internally, you want to structure things. That's actually a great segue into kind of our topic today. But you want to make sure that you understand how are people using the platform, how are they using the system, where are they going to be looking for this kind of information. And so you might even remove the search. And that's why you have, like, you go into a fairly, a frequently trafficked SharePoint site, and you have the ability to pin the relevant resources to a link list on the side. You can do that on your intranet as well, where you have those at the fingertips. Here's the main things people are looking for. That's why I do enjoy looking at a lot of the surface data of like, what are people in my community, in my team looking for?
I love that so much, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff where, again, where I might be going down and doing research on a new project, and people might come behind that and be like, hey, I see what you're doing. And are you aware of this other thing as well? And so that helps drive interaction. But the segue into the topic. So the topic today is making governance stick. And we were talking about what are the challenges, the balance between automated versus manual governance. That's a great topic. So maybe we start there. Joy, how much should you automate? How much should you just leave manual so that people can fine tune what they're looking for?
Well, I'll give you my consultant answer first. It depends.
All right.
Right.
We need a slide for that. I know every time it's we need a sound effect like a gong or something. Yeah.
How many times can you say it in a conversation? But what is critical? And that's going to be different, not just from company to company to company or organization or industry, but what is critical inside of business areas inside of an organization. Things that should be very rigid for projects, like naming conventions, the way the naming convention is done may probably going to be quite different than what a naming convention should look like for those more casual workspaces or teams or communities and organization, or even like department teams and workspaces. So you said, you and Ragnar both mentioned this, that you like to see how people use things and how they're working. It is a superpower for an IT professional to be able to sit down and talk to the business users, find out how they work, talk to compliance, talk to their colleagues inside of IT, find out how they think about their data, what's working really well, what is horrible, and what needs to be very strict, very managed, very controlled, and what could be more casual. I don't think there's a one size fits all, but
otherwise,
sorry.
Yeah, I think otherwise, if you would be too restrict and too restrictive, then you would earn too much resistance. So I think it's all about change management, that you have to be a little bit more casual. Otherwise, you would earn too much.
That's a hard thing too, is that you want to, in fact, I advise, like, I'm a big proponent of provisioning, because if you go in and create the templates, like for Teams creation, for SharePoint site creation, for community and engage creation, for each of those things, the primary workspaces where people are, the more that you can structure that or put up the guardrails ahead of time and then get out of the way. Like, I'm a proponent of not having an approval process for creating a team. Like, let anybody go create a team. However, and then structure that, have it from a template. However, on the back end of that, monitoring and looking at, hey, this site that you created hasn't been used in 30 days, 60 days. You know, why? Let's have a conversation. After 90 days of non-use, we automatically shut it down. Again, something you can automate. But at least you can have the governance discussion, because I think to these points, it's a mistake to be so heavy-handed with governance and think about how locked down people had SharePoint in the early years of SharePoint, that they were so fearful of people doing things and not having taken the time to set up the right permissions levels and information architecture. What they did to correct that behavior was lock everybody out. Then what happened? People didn't use it, and they went around it, and they talked about how much they hated it.
Yep. And even then, archive, and that's a conversation that's new again. Inside of the Microsoft 365 space. And of course, there are third-party tools that provide solutions for that in the community as well. But what does that need to look like? Should it be you haven't touched this in 90 days, you're out, and it just goes? Or do we need to have a process where you go, yeah, I know, but we had this other thing come up and we got distracted. Okay, we're going to use it now, I promise. And you renew it for a certain amount of time. Like, what does that look like? And that heavy-handedness we try to avoid is, I think, why governance has such a bad reputation. IT departments, we built manuals and we worked with compliance, or we worked with legal, and we had these massive documents that we beat people over the head with and write all this stuff down. You couldn't enforce it, some of it anyway. I had a customer once. You may not edit and move around the web parts on your department, your internal department SharePoint site. That was written down in the governance. But they were still owners of their internal department SharePoint sites.
What would happen? Is it because it is easier to get forgiveness than permission? So if they can move things around,
look at all of them. Nobody else can go to it because it's yours. Who cares? Do what you want. Go brand it I don't know. What's the big sports ball thing happening right now?
Big sports team event? I don't know.
Yeah. Go put your sports team color on it. Nobody cares.
Go team.
If it's on the intranet, go sports ball. But if it's on the intranet, okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense. Well, and it's controllable.
I understand that the other side of that, though, is that a lot of organizations that allowed that openness and let people be creative, and that what happens is they broke a lot of things. Not obviously SharePoint matured, so that you back with the 2010 version, you had the sandbox solutions, for example, to let you go and experiment. So you could separate that, and any healthy organization has a dev and a transitional environment. They have their production environment. They've got staging over. Again, that's for on the development environments. We tend not to have that for other systems. I mean, Microsoft 365, it's an evergreen. Now you're live. So anything you go in and touch and do, but there's a lot less stuff you can break.
Well, when you started talking about people breaking things, I started revisiting past trauma from SharePoint Designer.
The artistry that came with breaking systems, breaking it down. Yes.
Joy, when you were talking about this whole thing about resistance and that sometimes governance can be too strict, I had one thought when I listened to you. I thought, why not using Copilot to have a conversation with the owners of a SharePoint site, with the owners of a Teams team, to have the conversation with Copilot around using it. So Copilot could be used to make a more better fitting life cycle, actually, because at a point, like 30 days, not use Teams, not use SharePoint site, it could start to do a conversation, and then after a short dialogue, the deletion cycle or retention cycle or whatever archiving thing could be modified. So sometimes, yes, we all know sometimes it is too strict, and because it is too strict and too general, governance is not one of the most loved topic. But maybe Copilot could be here the solution to have a dialogue and find out the exact needs for this special site and for this Microsoft Teams team.
I think we're close to having a Copilot for that works across the various admin centers. So it's on the back end of it. I want to use natural language to go and look at the chaos that's happening behind, because this is another thing. I mean, the complexity of how many in the collaboration stack, how many admin centers are there? 12 or 14, something like that. I mean, with all of that, again, I may have with the SharePoint background or Teams background, I'm familiar with those admin centers. But if somebody leaves the organization, do I know everything that they've touched? Do I have access to all of those? Are there artifacts that have been created that are living somewhere? What do I do with that? So what is our policy? What is our process around making sure that there are not, that digital ghost of that former employee that is mucking things up? They're the, an owner. So there's sites that are ownerless. There's content that's ownerless. What happens there. And so I can see a bright future for Copilot on the back end.
Oh, totally. Because currently you just ignore it. Whatever happens, which is probably, not to be too pessimistic, what most organizations do is they choose to do nothing. And if that's not out of negligence per se, it's because there's not an easy way to manage that right now. Or they PowerShell script the heck out of it.
Yeah, right? And then that PowerShell guy is on vacation, extended vacation. Who's doing that?
Wait, you let the PowerShell guy go on vacation? That's insane. I mean, there's solutions out there that can help with these things, but you've got to think about it. You've got to have those conversations. You've got what's important to us. What are we trying to avoid? What's our storage footprint look like? Right? How much extra are we having to pay for storage? Ragnar, you did it. You broke the wall down. You said Copilot. I was curious if we were going to have this conversation without saying Copilot, but I don't think we're allowed to do that.
No, because our sponsor today is Microsoft Copilot.
But one of the big it's not a buzzword. It's one of the big concerns around the buzzword of AI, Copilot specifically, is oversharing internally. So if you don't have governance in place to manage life cycle of content, even from a human resources perspective, right? They've got governance around employee life cycle.
Yeah.
If that's not identified, if there aren't processes for that, you're looking at maybe losing valuable data when that OneDrive goes poof because nobody got to it in time, or oversharing content because it's just out there lingering and maybe Joy inherits it and she didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah.
Don't know.
We had this conversation briefly in Orlando at the Microsoft 365 community conference. And for those that weren't there, I was chained to the booth down the expo hall. So I saw Joy a lot down there. But we're talking about how one thing that's not changed back from the early years of SharePoint is that you could have a 10,000 person organization and there's still like 1.5 people that own the systems. And so that idea of, doing more with less, and there's that issue of still not having sufficient people to go and look at this. So a lot of times when you're talking about governance and you're talking to the person who's that one or that half, role, half their time is spent on their
duties as assigned.
And they're like, I need to figure out how, again, what I automate, what I have to go and look at. How much can I use out of the box? What can I go and build? What can I script? What can I control versus what's out there third party that I could buy to do a lot of this stuff?
Yeah.
And I mean, my answer for that is, look, it's a combination of those things. It depends on budget, the willingness of your leadership to take those steps. But governance is one of those issues. It's like security. Most organizations don't think about security until there's a breach.
Yeah.
Governance just works until it doesn't.
Right.
Joy, tell us more why customers are currently purchasing your software. Is it because they have a completely messed up M365 tenant, or they have a beautiful tenant and they just want to do everything right, and then they need governance tools? So tell me more about why they are.
I thought that was the comedy part. There's like they have a beautiful environment that's working well, but they want to do more.
Please keep it stable. Yeah.
I mean, there might be a unicorn out there somewhere. Most of the time, it is because they recognize there is a need. And hear me, IT admins, hear me, PowerShell gods with the little g. Yes, it's a little g. I'm sorry. You do wild and wonderful things, and it is amazing what can be done with those scripts. But that itself is a form of technical debt, just for the amount of maintenance that has to go into it. And if you don't have your mini-me version of you that can manage that, should you choose to go on vacation or holidays, it can be a sticky place. Typically, a customer comes to Orchestry because they know they need to do a cleanup. One came very quickly because there was that security breach, and they saw a demo of our guest management solution. I would say maybe 10% come because they're just getting started, or they're just getting serious with Microsoft 365, and they do want to set it up with templates and the automated governance from the start. And let it be clean, which I think is amazing and very forward thinking. We don't always have the luxury of doing that.
A lot of those people are bringing that experience from other companies. I think that's a big part of that. Yeah.
I think what's really interesting is I have a unique perspective, because I would say I'm sharing this responsibility now as the team grows, but I used to do most of the installs. I still do a lot of the installs because it's just fun, and I get to be people-y, and I love it. But usually when Orchestry is installed, I get a front row seat when the admin or the person that did the install sees the dashboard that shows all of their modern content and how much of that is active. Interestingly enough, the average active content for a tenant, and that could be an organization with 250 users, or it could be an organization with 5,000 users. On average, only 33% of content in that tenant is active.
Oh.
I've never seen more than 60%.
Yeah. Well, again, there's that. I mean, that's part of the problem. That's why I am a fan of the kind of automation where, look, if a site was created, a team was created, and like 90 days later, the owner of that is contacted, maybe after 30 days, and maybe you have reach out to them, like, no one's used this.
What you
doing? Is it still valid? I mean, but you have to realize too that long-term projects, there could be 30, 60, 90 days where it's active. So if your process then does a check-in, and same with content, like that content needs to be there. Maybe there are legal reasons for it being in place. But if you have a process that doesn't forget about that content, that doesn't forget about those workspaces that were created, and checks in with those owners on a regular basis, that you make sure that as part of your governance process. And again, maybe it's the way I've run it, like where we had a monthly governance meeting with stakeholders from around the organization, and we had an agenda around that, but we had a methodology. We went through, here's the things that we looked at, the change log, here's what's going on, discussing what's there, answering questions, talking about new requests, all those kinds of things. But it allowed us to go through, and then we're focusing on the exceptions. We're not worrying about content that's rarely accessed but valid, and we can then focus on the rest of the exceptions, because that's a lot of what governance should be. Instead of sweating the daily tasks, I mean, that's where I say, automate the repetitive, the common, those things, Make sure that you've got your dashboard that you can see how are we performing, how are we moving along, and then you can focus your time on the exceptions.
Yeah, and the more critical something is for your organization, the more you really need to focus on automating it. Because you can have good intent and say, okay, the rule is when you get your project team, when you're done with it, you archive it. And here's the process to archive it. Sure, and we can all go in with really good intentions to do that. But we are busy. And Christian, you said, the do more with less, or is what it kind of feels like in reality is do something with nothing. So you're just so busy. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it. But you've got all these other things going on, and that kind of falls off the to-do list, or planner just gives up notifying you about it. It's like, okay, it's not going to happen. It's a thing. So automating those, or Ragnar, how long have you talked to people about naming conventions?
But the different thing, Joy, is when we talk about finding out which content is most important and most critical, it's a question, how do we classify content as critical? Yes, of course, we can use pure sensitivity labels and say, okay, the only critical content is labeled as highly confidential or something. So we can use labels for it. But is it just enough to use labels? Because labels are sometimes only used for retention policies and this kind of compliance topics. But I think it is super important to spend more conversations about to define how do we define urgency and criticality and importance. Because otherwise we would just be lost in millions of documents, and we don't know where we should spend time in activating that content and running a zombie apocalypse in our tenant.
Yeah,
it's true. Yeah, the old, for that, even like, what does classification mean for an organization? Is it as formal as a label, or is it just saying if it's a project, put PRJ in the name? So we'd see it, you can find that through scripting, finding the groups, things like that, and then if we know what the classification is, what does that mean? And how do we action on the back end and go, well, if it was a project, then if it goes inactive for 90 days, the compliance team's going to come in, review the content, make sure it gets handled appropriately. Like, how do we get those things in action such that it's as automated as possible so it really does happen? Power Automate 100% could be your friend for that.
Or maybe also our friend Copilot. Currently, we're talking about Copilot to summarize a Word document or summarize a bunch of Teams chats. But maybe we can also use Copilot in the future and get more information about a SharePoint list or SharePoint site collection or SharePoint site to find out importance, urgency, and so on. So this would be a huge value for Copilot, which is needed then for this governance topics like archiving and deletion.
Again, unofficially, this episode is sponsored today by Microsoft Copilot. So go and buy. Makes a great stocking stuffer. Yeah.
Well, we weren't, I mean, it has to be said. Let's be honest. And this is not to be all buzzwordy or whatever. Governance is Copilot readiness. It just is. So he keeps saying that word. If you say it 3 times, it will appear, right?
But this is why governance is also it's not a, like you said early on, it's not just a report that you compile at the beginning, like here's the state of it. It's not a checklist, like are we meeting this? It's an ongoing dialogue, because I mean, even things like talking about naming conventions. I mean, I spent half of my time, and I spent a couple of years where I was a SharePoint admin. It was part of my role, part of my organization. And, I spent half my time cleaning up because of reorgs and shuffling the information, and then going back and looking at changing naming conventions, adjusting, modifying those things around it. And just a lot of it is part of that. But that's, if you have that cadence, if people understand, again, if it's part of your collaboration culture that, hey, we're going to have this conversation, and I know I see this issue here, I'm going to bring it up in this monthly governance body. That's the right place for it. There's a process for that. And then I can track the change to see that implementation made. Governance is as much about change management than it is about, security and compliance.
100%. And the more the same topic comes up, then that's something you really need to start paying attention to and devoting resources to it, whether that's to, I don't know, build a Power Automate flow that can help move things around or write your scripts or something. If it's a naming convention, again, that's really something that has to be automated. I have never seen a goodwill naming convention governance policy work, at least not for more than 6 weeks.
Well, maybe the final question here is we'll kind of wrap up. And again, if you're watching, if you've got questions, want to ask, we could take a few extra moments and, we'd love to hear your questions. But so going back to the title here, when you say what does it take to make governance stick? How do you respond to that? How do you make governance with an organization that struggles with that? How do you help that organization understand the importance of governance and building that into the culture?
More than likely, people know why it needs to work because they're suffering from it not working. Because if you're in I'm in a relatively small company. We have 25 employees, and I'm probably a member of, I don't know how many teams. If it weren't for that naming convention, I would always be looking around going, where's that team? Where's that team? Because it's just these random generic names, right? So right there, you can show the value, and that's what it has to do. It has to provide value. It also has to not get in the way. So I need value. I need it to not slow me down, not make me stumble, not be hard for me, which is a lot of where automation comes in. It needs to make my life better. I need to be able to see the name and know immediately that's the team I'm looking for. If I'm an M365 admin and I manage groups, seeing PROJ or PRJ, I know that that's for a project. Seeing DPT, I know that's for a department. Immediately, I have a hint, I have a clue before I don't have to go dig in or ask people or find out. It needs to, here's a good Microsoft phrase. It needs to be in the flow of work. It needs to make sense. It needs to provide value. Those off the cuff, not off the cuff, I talk about this stuff all the time, but those are my 3 things. That it just really needs to do those things. And then it starts to set you up for success.
Yeah, Ragnar, anything from you? Your advice for organizations that are struggling to make governance part of their culture?
It's all about finding out what already worked. Companies have so much experience with changes, and then finding out from the past project where some things had to be changed, learn from the best practices around changes and change management, and also reuse this kind of skills and methodologies and approaches for governance. So it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel when there is a structure of change management which already worked. So really started with the lowest level, but change management is so important for governance. You need this kind of trainings and user adoption topics for governance. And many companies have great experiences, so just use it.
Totally.
Yeah, the one thing that I agree with those points. One thing I'll add in is that it's very important. I say this a lot. It's kind of it's turned into a Buckleyism, but you can't plan for the future if you don't understand where you are today. You need to baseline, what is our understanding? What are we doing, today, so that we can build a strategy. It's why I'm a big fan of the maturity model. That if you've not seen the M365 maturity model, it's pretty detailed. There's a lot in there. You don't need to go hardcore into it, but at some level, understand what are our constraints? What are the laws we must abide by? What are the rules? What are how are we regulated depending on your industry? All of those things. You need to understand those constraints and then as part of that baseline is to understand how are people using the technology, or how do they need to be using it today? And from those things, we know our constraints, we know how people are using it. Then you can build those guardrails. Then you know, here's where I need to automate. Here's where I can make it self-serve governance. But at the end of the day, you can have the most secure and compliant and locked down environment, and you show me that perfectly secure and compliant system, I'll show you a system that users aren't using. That's why.
Oh, yeah.
So having sprawl, having issues pop up is sometimes it's a good sign that people are actually using the technology and they're collaborating. So it has to be a balance between those.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I'll add to that, though I am kind of disappointed. I was hoping one of us would say something very contentious and it would just turn into an all-out brawl.
About Copilot?
Yeah. Oh. But if you're struggling at your organization to find that balance, right? To these two guys here, they've got content out there. You can find really good content to help you get started. There are great resources around change management, around governance and adoption. They're all tied together. Ragnar, you made the point too. Change management is so important. If you don't have people in your department that are really good talking to the business, if you're in IT, or if you're in the business and you've just had bad experiences working with IT before it happens, right? Find a way. Have those conversations, because IT can't know how you in project management or human resources or financing, you can't know how you work and how you need to work. We need to know the pain points. We need to know the challenges. We need to know the struggles. And IT got to be willing to hear it. We've got to be willing to be a little flexible, have that conversation and solve those problems. And you're really setting yourself for a lot of success for Copilot readiness, for governance, just for business processes to work.
Wow. I think that's a point. I think when we have a clear understanding.
Oh, we lost his audio there.
Oh no.
Say that, oh no, we have to talk to people. Oh, nobody wants that, Joy.
Who played The Legend of Zelda, right? It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. Yeah, find a friend. Find a friend. They're out there. Find someone like me that loves to talk to people.
Yeah. Ragnar, you cut out right at the beginning of your statement there.
Yep.
If you want to repeat.
He says, yes, he did.
Oh, I think we lost him again now.
Yeah.
Well, Joy, I know that we're about at time here. Thank you so much for being a guest this month. I know, of course, we're definitely going to have you back. There's more coming up, folks, so stay tuned. Lots happening, and there's Ragnar back again. So, Joy, we're going to say goodbye to you here. Thank you. I know Ragnar has a few more words to say, but thanks a lot, Joy.
Finally, thank you so much for being here, Joy.
Joy, we'll see you at the next week in Seattle at TechCon 365. So
see you at TechCon. Thank you, gentlemen.
And so Ragnar, so I know that there's a lot of other stuff going on. I will say that episode 6, it's already locked down. We've got a date. We have our guest, so we'll be joined by Erica Tully, who's former MVP, now at Microsoft, talking about Purview. And so that should be a great conversation. And anything else going on, Ragnar?
Oh, I will share a bit more. Oh, sorry, I'm struggling. Sorry, I'm struggling here with my Wi-Fi connection. It's probably. I will share more in the next show.
Okay, when you have a good connection. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And so again, we'll be looking for in social next week. We should have the date, start promoting that out there with our guest. And if you have any questions about Purview and how you fit that into your governance practices, I mean, that's going to be a great topic for everybody. So thanks a lot, everybody. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks for joining.
I guess I should get this other brand asset ready to go. There we go.